Well, there's no question transgender is one of the most divisive issues we're facing today. I'm not so sure we're facing it all that well. I mean, do you know what to say when someone says to you, I'm transitioning? Or when someone says, I know you have known me by this name, by this pronoun, but now I am asking you to call me by another name and another pronoun. Do you know how to navigate those kinds of conversations? Well, I want you to meet somebody who can help you do just that. Christine Sneeringer is a pastoral care counselor, a spiritual coach, a speaker, and a writer. She recently completed her theology degree at Oxford University. Her bio says she is, and I quote, eager to make a difference. Hey, well, she has done just that. Oh, she's been doing that for a long time. I know that. But now, specifically now, she's authored a book, a critical book, by the way. Look, you're going to love this. It is user friendly, it's concise, it is doctrinally solid. It's called Answers to Gender Madness, a quick guide to help you navigate the confusion. This is put out through Coral Ridge Ministries, by the way, so you know this is solid stuff, both doctrinally and practically. I have read through the book a few times. I'm especially impressed with, as I said, its user friendliness. You are going to want to get yourself a copy. Let's talk to the author then. That is Christine Sneeringer. Christine, it is great seeing you.
Hi, Joe. It's so good to see you. It's been so long, man.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for taking the time, and congratulations. There is nothing I think like authoring a book, and I
You
know
should know.
one of the stupidest things I ever said to my wife was, "Gee, this is just like having a baby." Whack! Not the right thing to say to a lady who's had a baby, but I think, yeah, in a way. I mean, obviously, it's not the
It
same, but there
is.
are principles that are the same. It's conceived in your mind, right? You
Yeah,
know
yeah, yeah,
what you want
yeah.
it to be. It starts forming. You go into labor. I don't know what it was like
100%.
for you, but to me, the
Oh,
last part of it was the worst. Like, just get this thing out of me, you know?
no, I get it. And
Yeah.
I used to produce material for Cy Rogers, and every one of those was my little baby.
Oh, right, right,
And so
sure.
I knew, and the joy of like seeing your baby in the flesh, like holding it, and
Oh,
then
I
available
know.
to others. So
Isn't
this was
that the
the first time.
cutest thing?
I know, what a cute baby.
No, seriously. Yeah, no, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. Uh, speaking of writing, I mean, when I wrote my first book, I was prompted largely by my experience, where I had been, what I had done, et cetera, et cetera. I'm assuming your own experience played into this to some extent. So, what kind of personal experiences prompted you to write this book?
That's a great question, Joe. And I wish it wasn't coming from personal experience because it came from a lot of trauma growing up
I bet.
in a
Yeah.
home where there was domestic violence from my dad to my mom and from my older brother to me. And then add to that sexual abuse. I had a lot of really negative messages about what it means to be female. And so I hated my gender from a young age because I didn't want to, I associated femininity with victimhood and weakness. And I wanted nothing to do with weakness and victimhood. I wanted to be strong and powerful. So I gravitated toward masculinity. Of course, I wasn't able to articulate this at the time, but this is in looking back that I was trying to be tough and strong because I didn't want to grow up to be like mom, who I saw as a victim, and she was a victim. So it came from great personal experience. When I was young and growing up in the 70s, I heard about sex change.
Uh huh.
Back then it was called transsexual. Now it's
That's right. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and by changing the name to transgender made it a lot more nebulous because we can't even define gender anymore.
Right.
So it's really interesting how that worked. But I had heard, that my favorite sport is tennis, and I happen to think it's the best sport that God ever made. So, because I hold him responsible for something so fabulous, and but anyway, and there was a professional tennis player who transitioned when I was a child in the 70s, Renee Richards.
I remember. Yes.
Right. And I'd heard
Yeah.
of that. And I was like, I didn't know you could change. And so one year in my precociousness, I'm talking like grade school, one year, somebody says, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, a sex change. because I didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what all
Mm-hmm.
that entails, but all I thought was it means I won't be a victim anymore. Then that's what I want.
Right, right. Yes, to me, this sounds so tormenting, the sense of, okay, this is what I am, female, but this is what that means, weak,
Yes.
victimized,
Yes.
therefore make me something else.
100%. Let me get
Yeah,
out of this body so that I can have a different life experience, not realizing that, my dad and brother were broken people and that they were not representative of all men. It took me many years to figure that out, that there are some wonderful men in the world. I would say present company included. And so that, challenged my paradigm that they were all predatory or abusive.
hmm. But you see, this to me sounds so tormenting, especially to a child, a girl wrestling with the constraints of a body that she doesn't want, very limited options.
Yeah.
And it kind of begs the question too. I mean, if your opinion of men was so low, and I could see why it would be, on the one hand, you could think, well, why would you want to be one of those? But on the other hand, at least they seemed to have the power. I mean, to me, growing up, I felt in a lot of ways the same, but I always thought I would rather, if it's a choice between being a jerk and being a victim, I'd rather be a jerk.
Yeah, and that's the
You
thing.
know?
I wanted to be strong and powerful. I didn't want to be an abuser or a
Right.
perpetrator. Right. No, I got that. And I had a very I had a low view of men because they were abusers, but I also had a low view of my own gender, which puts me in a real catch-22 because what else are you going to be? You're going to be one or the other.
Christine, did you seriously consider then? They call it now reassignment surgery or gender. This to me is a joke, by the way, gender
Yes.
confirming surgery, but
Yeah.
a sex change operation we used to call it.
Well, I didn't seriously consider it in the sense that I never saw a doctor. I just knew I
Oh,
heard of it and I wanted one, didn't know what it involved. My name is Christine. I went by Chris, which is kind of like the equivalent of social transition. Like I hated my name because it's obviously female, whereas some names could be male or female, like Kelly or
right.
Lucy, but Christine is always going to be a girl. And so I went by Chris to kind of try to butch it up. But if I had the option, so I'm glad I grew up as a child of the 70s because I did not have the option to change
Right.
my sex.
Right.
And it's really, let's be clear, it's not a sex change, it's plastic surgery and you're wreaking havoc on your body. But kids are sold a lie that they can change their sex and that's not what's happening.
No, no, not even close to it. And I've always felt this is one of the tragedies of it is we are promoting a change that does not happen, that
Right,
cannot happen. And
right.
of course, not to go off on a rabbit trail, but you and I have been in ministry for decades now, promoting a very realistic change when people want to change their sexual behavior and they want to
100%.
express it in line with God's will. And people will say, no, no, that's an impossible change. You have to be who you are. And these same people would turn around and tell a child, oh, yeah, just reconfigure your body. It'll make you something else. You're describing a lot of pain and a lot of confusion that you obviously came out of years ago. But to write this, you had to dive back into a lot of that.
I
What
did.
was that like for you, going through so much detail?
You know, I mean, you're a therapist, so you walk through people with their life stories and stuff. And probably if I hadn't done a lot of my own work, I wouldn't have been able to go back through it in
I
such
bet.
detail,
Mm.
because I have done a lot of work and I continue to want to grow and be the best version of myself and have the most healing I can have.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's hard sometimes, you're unpacking your story. But the only reason I do it is to encourage others because that's the thing. When people have been through pain, for them to know they're not the only one who's experienced that, for them to know that somebody sees them and gets them is can be very healing. I mean, that's what you do as a therapist is you hold space for people and you communicate to them, I see you.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm doing it with the written word and with my own story and just to try to help people. So and I believe that's how God redeems my own pain is
Oh
that
yeah.
he can use it to be helpful to somebody else, which is really humbling for me because otherwise it's just pain is pain for the sake of pain and that's not, but if God can use it to bring good out of it, then all glory to him.
Oh, I think it's mind blowing that some of the worst parts of our lives turn into the tools
Hmm.
that we can use, that God uses us for things that are so redemptive. Well, you've already kind of clarified then an answer to my next question, which was who you were hoping would read this book. I mean, obviously, at least one group would be people who are going through what you've been going through, what you went through at that time. And good night. Is that ever
Well,
relevant today?
I would say yes, but I also think for parents, because
Uh-huh.
they're trying to figure out, I don't know what to do, because this is mostly impacting young people,
Yes. Yeah.
and teenage girls especially. Historically, this issue of wanting to transition my sex has always been male to female, less than 5%
Mhm.
of the population. And we've seen a 5,000% rise in teenage girls wanting to change and to be a boy, and wanting it so much that they're willing to do things like cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgery.
Right. Right.
So, I don't know how many of those are going to read this, but I feel like the reason I wrote it too is that there is a lot of information about this issue out there, but a lot of it I would call misinformation and propaganda, because it's coming up from a perspective that we don't share from our Christian worldview. We're looking at it from God's perspective. And
Mhm.
that's the only reason that I think I'm secure in my gender, is because I chose to come at it from a different approach, instead of like seeing myself and my femaleness as a liability,
Mhm.
choosing to say, okay, you know what, God, you made me a woman. I may not like it, but I'm going to trust you knew what you were doing, even though it feels like you didn't know.
Uh-huh.
And then in
Right.
time, I grew into that. But the people who are in the thick of it, I'm not sure. I don't know. I mean, I guess if they start to question things, that they would might find this book helpful. Certainly parents will. People who work with young people, like youth workers, things like that,
Mhm.
teachers. It's really, I think that the world is talking about this issue so much, and the church needs to talk about it more, because I
Mhm.
believe we have the truth on, we're God's creation. We're made in
Right.
his image,
Right.
on purpose, for a purpose. My femaleness is not a genetic roll of the dice.
Right. Right.
So I just came into alignment with who God says I am, and was willing to shift my mindset about my gender, and really go against my own feelings. And this is the problem, is we've really elevated feelings in our culture today and made that our God, like whatever I feel. And
Mhm.
I was going with the truth of God's word, who he says I am, and then trusting him that he knew what he was doing, even though sometimes it feels like he doesn't know what he's doing.
That's one of the reasons I'm so adamant about this. We can't compromise this issue, because to embrace transgenderism is to embrace the idea that either we have no creator, or if we have one, he obviously didn't know what he was doing.
Right.
So we have to help him out. I mean, if that's not blasphemous, what is?
I know.
You
Yeah.
know, and yet you look at the kind of confusion that you're describing, I can see why people could be so susceptible. When I was reading this, I was thinking of parents as well. I
Hmm.
mean, I thought about you, I thought about people like you and so forth. But one thing I thought was, as a parent, how much this would mean to be me, because it spells out so many things. I say this a lot, but it's true. We know where we stand, but we so often don't know the ramifications of where we stand. And I think this book spells out ramifications nicely, because to the parent whose daughter has just come and said, Mom, Dad, I've decided I'm going to transition. I want you to identify at me as male henceforth.
Right.
I've dealt over the years, Christine, with a lot of parents whose kids came out to them as gay or lesbian, and that's devastating to them. Of course it is. But this,
It's
I
next
mean, this,
level.
oh my gosh, all encompassing. You have to not only adjust
Yeah.
yourself now, Mom and Dad, to the way I will express myself sexually. I am choosing to live as though I am a different sex. I
It's a
mean, that's huge.
delusion. It's a
That's
delusion, and they're
huge.
asking everybody in their lives to buy into that delusion.
Hmm.
And it's a mental illness, really.
Well, I've often said, and I know you probably have said something along the same line. If I feel I'm in the wrong body, the problem is not my body. The
Right.
problem is my feeling. Let's work
Yes.
on my feeling, but let's not try to reshape reality
A
to
100%.
accommodate my feeling. You
Now,
know.
can I just want to say something though, because we did unpack a little of my story, and I shared how my own gender confusion was born out of trauma.
Hmm.
I'm not suggesting that all of the young people today who are wanting to transition, that theirs is coming from a place of abuse and victimhood, trauma, things like that. I mean, some may,
Uh
I
huh.
think there's some girls who maybe had some bad experiences, like whether it was date rape, things like that, where they're like, oh, I don't want to be a girl because that
Yeah.
makes, but I don't think most of it is. I think a lot of it's driven by ideology, social media, peer group influences. It's really propaganda, because you have the phenomenon, which I know I discuss in the book, called ROGD, rapid
Right.
onset gender dysphoria. My gender
Right.
dysphoria started in toddlerhood. my aunt told me that I'm as early as 3 years old, I was walking like a boy. I was already identifying.
Uh-huh.
So that was over quite a long period of time, probably 20 years of gender dysphoria. Whereas these kids, so a lot of these girls, teenage girls that are now identifying as boys, were very comfortable in their femaleness for many years, and then suddenly they come home from school and tell their parents, "These are my new pronouns." So that's
Uh-huh.
that's a whole new animal. And it's not necessarily born out of trauma. I just want to be clear on that.
Yeah, see, first of all, thank you for saying that, because so often when we talk about these types of things, homosexuality, transgender, people hear a testimony and think, "Oh, well, that's everybody's story then who is dealing with this," and that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
Um, but you tell me, Christine. I've often thought, okay, as bizarre as all this is, I can kind of see how some teenage girls would think, well, there's built-in community in the transgender
Yeah,
ideology. I
it's
will
true.
have built-in community that I won't
Right.
even have to work for. I can just jump in.
Mhm.
There's a built-in cause. Now that's attractive. There's a cause that I can stand for
Yeah.
and fight for. And I'll even get, I would think, a certain amount of affirmation, because a lot of people will say, this is the commonest thing I hear, oh, the kids who are trans, who come out as trans, they are so brave. They are so noble.
Yes.
This is such a
They're
great, I would
celebrated.
think, now to me, yeah, that's pretty attractive. I can see how someone would think, well, why not? Especially if you're dealing with some personal confusion anyway. I'm seeing more and more how people could be susceptible to that. Am I wrong? Does that jive at all with what
No,
you've
you are
seen?
absolutely on point that there are benefits to coming out. You are
Hmm.
celebrated. I mean, honestly, you go back 10 years, 2014. I think it was 2014 when Bruce Jenner. No, it's
Right.
2014. 2014, there was a Time magazine article cover story said transgender tipping point. 2015 was the year of Bruce Jenner, where he had the Diane Sawyer interview. It was
I
one of the
remember.
most watched ABC 2020
Yes.
interviews.
Yes.
He was being celebrated, and then he won the Courage Award from ESPN.
Right. Right.
He won Woman of the Year from Glamour
Yeah.
magazine, which is a slap in the face to every woman,
Yeah.
and he was celebrated.
Yeah.
So
Oh, absolutely.
it started there because I had never seen it. He was probably the most widely celebrated trans person we've ever in history. Like there's
Hands
never
down.
he made it mainstream. He made it
Yeah.
popular.
I've often thought he was the Rock Hudson for transgenders.
100%. He
When
was
Rock Hudson came out, it was like, oh, well, if he's out, then it's okay.
it was the tipping point. And that's
Yeah.
not necessarily his fault. It's how culture reacted to
No,
him.
no.
So children, yeah, they want to be celebrated. They want to be applauded. And for years, even in more recent years, prior to this movement, to this time in history where we're doing this with the trans issue, it was the gay issue. Children identifying as lesbian or gay were celebrated in school, and they were more popular
Hmm.
than the heterosexual kids because that's plain vanilla. And
Hmm.
now we're taking it to another level: is children who are identifying as trans. We're celebrating them, courage, all this, and I mean, kids want that, but we got to find a better way to affirm our children than to affirm them in these ways. The other thing I think is that we got to help them. Like our mutual friend Kathy Cook and I have had
Yeah.
conversations about how do you help a child be secure in their gender identity. And I said, Kathy, first of all, to be secure in your gender identity, you got to be secure in your identity first.
Right.
You
Good.
know, and
Good.
so
Yeah.
that's what we have to help kids be, is so that they don't need that red carpet moment, that validation for them to want to do this. Like, so if you're solid and secure in who you are, you're not going to have to go to this extreme to get attention.
I would take that even further too, because I think if you're solid and secure in who you are, you will recognize your uniqueness. I think it's a terrible thing if we tell a growing girl that she's supposed to be a Barbie doll if she happens to be athletic and she's strong and I certainly don't think that means she's gender confused or she's a guy or
Right.
there's anything wrong with that.
Right.
Or if a guy is artistic and isn't a football player, for heaven's sake, I don't want him feeling as though that somehow puts him outside of maleness just
Right.
because he's not adopting what we would call stereotypical masculine or male roles.
100%.
I think there's plenty of room in there. To me, the Bible is very clear and even rigid in the fact that we are created male or female, case closed.
Right.
I think there's a lot of leeway in how each of us expresses our maleness or our femaleness. And I'm not even so sure that, I mean, you look at the Proverbs woman, for heaven's
31.
sake,
Yeah.
that's a lady's lady, but I wouldn't mess with her. I
She
mean,
was an entrepreneur. She was, yeah,
yeah,
she was
look at that gal. I mean,
yes,
that's,
she was
just
awesome.
like
Yeah,
David, a warrior that I would
right.
never mess with. And yet, who was more poetic and more expressive than that guy? So, I guess what I'm saying is, I think we can celebrate the sex we are born without imposing a particular expectation on people that has nothing to do with what the Bible says about our maleness or our femaleness,
Yes. I think it's Billboard Chris. I don't know if you're familiar with him, who says that there are two sexes, but an
hmm
infinite number of ways to express your gender.
That's well
So
put.
yes, I think so too. And I was one of those who was balking at the idea of I have to be like Barbie to be
hmm
considered female,
hmm
because I had disdain for Barbie. Growing up, when I was growing up, the most popular TV show was called Three's Company, if you
hmm
remember that.
Yeah.
And it was this blonde girl named Chrissy, and
hmm
she was an airhead.
Actually, yes.
And
Yeah,
so
no, seriously, yes.
she
Yeah.
was, and but that's how femininity was depicted. Now we've
Yeah.
reversed it. Women are the superheroes and guys are the morons.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that. I don't think that's any better. We've gone from one extreme to another. Men have value, women have value.
Right.
We
Yeah.
do need to
Yeah.
celebrate our uniqueness. In the Bible, Ephesians 2:10 says that we are his workmanship. And
Yeah.
another word for that, and you're more of a scholar than I am, so I don't know why I'm telling you this, Joe, but the Greek word is poema. You just
Yeah.
mentioned poem, but also that can be translated, we are his masterpiece.
Right. Right.
And so each one of us is a masterpiece because
Yeah.
we all have unique gifts, talents, and abilities. So I grew up, I did gravitate toward masculinity, and part of that was out of my brokenness, but also I genuinely enjoyed sports.
Uh-huh.
So I played lots of them. I love tennis, but I played sandlot football. I played Little League baseball. They didn't have a girls version. Like, now we have softball, but softball wasn't available to me as a child. So 2 blocks from my house was the baseball field. And I played the only female on a Little League baseball team with boys. Well, obviously if it was only female. Yeah. But, and, what's so interesting about that? The position that I played catcher. And you know why I wanted to play catcher? I wanted to wear all that equipment. And if that's not a young girl longing for protection and
That's
safety,
interesting,
right?
Christine. Yeah. Yeah. Real interesting. Well, that actually raises a pretty important question because I know, especially parents who are listening to this, who are like, oh, please, Lord, please bring my daughter out of what this woman was in. What brought you out? Something happened.
Well, I came to faith in,
Uh-huh.
in, in God through Jesus Christ, and actually through sports ministry. I was probably on my way to be a very, what's the right word? Just vociferous gay activist, because I had enough anger in me for years of physical, verbal, and sexual abuse that
Right.
uh, I I I would have probably made a great gay activist. Cy Rogers used to tell me, Christine, I'm so glad you used your powers for good and not for evil. So, but anyway, so my love of sports drew me into a situation where I got to play softball. I had the opportunity to play softball with one of my best friends on a Christian softball team. It was a bunch of Baptists. And I wasn't living for God, and I wasn't looking for him because I'd had a couple false starts with God. My dad was growing up, he came to faith at some point in the 70s, but for me it was very confusing because his behavior didn't change. So he was still an abusive man, even though he was dragging us to church, and I was only allowed to watch Christian television for a while when I was in junior high. And he was drunk every night. So that was really hard and confusing. So I didn't want the God that he was representing to me. So
No,
yeah, so I
I
was going
wouldn't.
my own. I know, who would want that God? And but then through this sports team, through this softball team, I was surrounded with Christians, and I really didn't care that they were Christian. I was just interested in playing ball, and it was through them, through that experience, got me around Christians on a regular basis. And I did not know that. I don't know if they were all praying for me, but some of them were. And I mean, I just didn't play ball like a Christian. I don't know if if that makes sense. I was super competitive. I was like throwing my
You
gloves.
play like a heathen.
I did. I threw my glove on the field when the ball got past the shortstop. I was swearing on the field, and it's a Christian team. My jersey said "Say yes to Jesus," and they're horrified. And so I found out that
There's a good movie in here somewhere.
oh, totally. They were trying to be light in a dark world. They were the only Christian team in the secular league, and meanwhile they had me, this darkness in the outfield. So that'd be
Yeah.
the title of the movie, Darkness in the Outfield. But they came into the dugout, and I didn't know this because they did it discreetly, but they complained about me. as you do. And I think we call that prayer requests. And they
Yeah.
were like, Coach, she's cussing in the outfield. And he said, you see that girl, you pray for that girl. So God bless him that he didn't tell me, listen, you better, shape up or ship out. So I think it was the prayers of the saints. It was their love and their kindness for me that over time, like it took 18 months. It wasn't anything quick. But now that I've been praying for certain people in my life for many years, that I think 18 months is relatively quick for me to realize they had something I wanted. I was drawn to them because of their love for each other, their love for me, which I didn't think I deserved. And there was something unique about them. And that's, there was a song that we used to sing, you would probably be familiar with it, called They'll Know We Are Christians by Our
Oh,
Love.
yeah, sure.
I don't know that that's the church's testimony today.
Good point. No, I don't know that it is either. People listening to this would want to know so much more about you. They'd want to contact you, but I also am glad to say they're going to have a chance to hear a lot more because I have a lot more questions for you. So
All right,
I'm going
let's
to
do
ask you to come back next week
it.
and talk about some of the specifics that go with this, because a lot of people are going to want to know, okay, when the rubber meets the road, what do you do with this situation, that situation, that situation? So if that's okay by you, let's continue the conversation there. But Christine, in the meantime, of course, people are going to want to get the book. Should they go through the truegender.com
Oh,
website
I'm
or
sorry. It's called Worthy
which?
Creations.
Worthy Creations,
I was trying to
worthycreations.com?
rebrand. Worthycreations.org. I was trying to
.org.
rebrand, Joe, but because gender is so indefinable, we just sticking with Worthy Creations, which is the ministry I've been a part of for 25 years.
I've
So,
always loved that title too, Worthy
isn't
Creations. So,
it?
okay, yeah.
It's so good. Yeah.
And if
Worthycreations.org.
folks want to contact you to have you come speak at their church or
Oh, that would
consult
be
with
great.
them, is that also the same
Same
address
place.
they should go to?
Worthycreations.org. Yes, that's how they can find me.
Christine Sneeringer, worthycreations.org. It is great having you. Looking forward to talking with you more about this, Christine. Thank you. God
Absolutely.
bless.
Thanks, Joe.
Hey, and thank you all for joining us. If you haven't taken the time to subscribe to the podcast yet, I wish you would, please. If you like what you're hearing, hit the bell in the comment section. Let me know you subscribe so I can thank you personally. We would love to have you be a part of this community. Also, if you want to support this work, this podcast, Christians in the Cancel Culture, is a part of Cloudfire Ministries. If you'd like to know more about our work and you'd like to partner with us in being able to go on providing this material, just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving. Let's remember our job description as we're closing. Paul said to Timothy, if you call yourself a servant of the Lord, well, here's the do's and the don'ts. The servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all, apt to teach, patient, in meekness, instructing those who oppose themselves, if perhaps God will grant them repentance according to the acknowledging of the truth. That's what Christine's been talking about with us today. God granting repentance according to the acknowledging of the truth. Real important that we're taking a stand, but let's remember when it comes to truth, it is not just where we stand, it is also how we stand. Thank you for being here. God bless.